I live in the Northeast now, but I get asked a lot if I miss living in the South. In particular, if I miss living in Texas. What I tell most people is no, because I don't like hot weather. And it's hot there most of the year round. Not just hot, but exceedingly hot, right? The sort of heat that's oppressive, that weighs you down, that beats you down if you're outside for more than a moment too long, which is about 1 second, and then you're just done with it. I grew up in East Texas, which is very humid, like living here, where you walk outside and you're drenched, but now you've got 105, 106 degree heat. Sometimes that's in the shade. So no, a lot of the time I don't miss living in Texas. There are some things, sure, that I miss. Particularly, I miss most things related to food, okay? It's not that you can't find good food up here. I miss really good Tex-Mex. Now, you know how much I like food, and so this is not going to surprise you that the thing I miss is going to be related to food. I miss food, though. I miss Cajun food. Again, growing up in East Texas, near Louisiana, I miss really good Cajun food. I want somebody to open up a Cajun food restaurant here in Danbury. I know they're not going to, but that's what I want. But every time I'm asked about whether I miss living in the South or miss living in Texas, my mind immediately, and it's been doing it right now as I've been speaking, my mind begins to replay memories that I have of growing up there. Memories that I have of being an adult there and what that was like. I'm sure you all have the same sort of mechanism that gets triggered by certain questions that get asked of you, like, where did you grow up? What was your, home life like, your childhood like, that sort of thing? Or maybe there are certain smells that you cook a home meal and memory gets triggered in you. Or you see a sight, right, that memory gets triggered for you. Maybe it's looking at certain pictures that you still have of years gone by, or running into an old friend or a family member that you've not seen in quite some time, which is very true now because none of us see any of our friends and family anymore. But whatever it is that sparks those memories, we replay our past selves all up here in our minds. Sometimes those memories are positive and we're really excited by them and we think very fondly of them. And sometimes they're not so great, but they're always powerful. The things that replay in our mind are always powerful memories, ones that have stuck with us through the years. What we're about to read from Exodus 12 and 13 is a powerful memory. It's one that was meant to live long in the minds of the Israelites. They weren't supposed to forget. Memories aren't only for our benefit, though, either. The memory of Exodus 12 and 13 wasn't just for those who witnessed or participated in the event way back in Egypt at that time. The memory was also for the benefit of all Israelites who would grow up in this faith and in this tradition. It's a memory that has been passed down to us now. And we even have our own spin on it, as we were talking about just a moment ago. Our communion connects to Passover in very deep and meaningful ways. But let's read from chapters 12 and 13, take a look at what's said there, what happened in Egypt all those years ago, and then we're going to talk about what it meant then and I think what it still means today. So from Exodus 12, we're going to read the first 13, and then from 13, 1 through 9. The word of the Lord from Exodus. While the Israelites were still in the land of Egypt, the Lord gave the following instructions to Moses and Aaron. From now on, this month will be the first month of the year for you. Announce to the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each family must choose a lamb or a young goat for a sacrifice, one animal for each household. If a family is too small to eat a whole animal, let them share with with another family in the neighborhood. Divide the animal according to the size of each family and how much they can eat. The animal you select must be a 1-year-old male, either a sheep or a goat, with no defects. Take special care of this chosen animal until the evening of the 14th day of this first month. Then the whole assembly of the community of Israel must slaughter their lamb or young goat at twilight. They are to take some of the blood and smear it on the sides and top of the door frames of the houses where they eat the animal. That same night they must roast the meat over a fire and eat it along with bitter salad greens and bread made without yeast. Do not eat any of the meat raw or boiled in water. The whole animal, including the head, legs, and internal organs, must be roasted over a fire. Do not eat any of it until the morning. Burn whatever is not eaten before morning. These are your instructions for eating this meal. Be fully dressed. Wear your sandals and carry your walking stick in your hand. Eat the meal with urgency, for this is the Lord's Passover. On that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. But the blood on your doorposts will serve as a sign marking the houses where you are staying. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. This plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. I'll flip over to chapter 13. Then the Lord said to Moses, dedicate to me every firstborn among the Israelites. The first offspring to be born of both humans and animals belongs to me. So Moses said to the people, this is a day to remember forever, the day you left Egypt, the place of your slavery. Today the Lord has brought you out by the power of his mighty hand. Remember, eat no food containing yeast. On this day in early spring, in the month of Abib, you have been set free. You must celebrate this event, in this month each year after the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites. He swore to your ancestors that he would give you this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. For 7 days the bread you eat must be made without yeast. Then on the seventh day celebrate a feast to the Lord. Eat bread without yeast during those 7 days. In fact, there must be no yeast bread or any yeast at all found within the borders of your land during this time. On the seventh day, you must explain to your children, I am celebrating what the Lord did for me when I left Egypt. This annual festival will be a visible sign to you, like a mark branded on your hand or your forehead. Let it remind you always to recite this teaching to the Lord. With a strong hand, the Lord rescued you from Egypt. I almost have this vision of them running to the borders of their land with the yeast in their hand, just trying to get it out. It always makes me laugh when I read this passage. All right, let's talk about Passover here. Of course, I had to put a picture of a little goat up here just to remind you how awful it is. Not really, right? But there's the symbolism here is really powerful. And of course, the New Testament picks up on this symbolism when it talks about Jesus as the Passover lamb. You can't read the New Testament without being drawn back to the Old Testament. I always tell people, because I've had people throughout the years tell me, well, the Old Testament, we don't need to read that anymore. There's no bother, right? Why should we pick up the Old Testament? It's just a bunch of old rules, a bunch of old stuff that doesn't matter to us because we're New Testament Christians. And I always say, how foolish of you. Not really in those words, but I challenge them. I challenge them to go read Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. I say, okay, start with Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, and I want you to read the first couple of chapters of Matthew. And I want you to do so without having any prior knowledge of the Old Testament. I want you to do so and tell me that you don't need the Old Testament to understand the New. And that shuts them up pretty quickly, usually. They realize how foolish a statement that is. We get in that mode sometimes, but even the words, the language about Jesus being the Passover lamb draws us back to this moment in time, this memory, this Passover. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning, the power that it represents to us. So I want to talk about Passover, both past and present. As I started a few minutes ago with talking about that Passover is this defining moment for the Israelites, this memory to live long in their minds and in their hearts. It isn't just a moment in time, though. It's a moment the Israelites were to continually go back to and to say, hey, this is the love that God showed us in this moment and has continued to show us as he's been with us. And one symbol of the importance of Passover is that the month in which it occurs, I don't know if you noticed this in chapter 12, was actually supposed to mark the beginning of the new year. That's what it says in Exodus chapter 12. But that's not when Israel celebrated the new year. Rosh Hashanah doesn't happen in the spring, it happens in September. Some of you probably know that. Last month was the Jewish New Year. So why is that? What's going on there? Because Israel never took that literally. They never adopted the springtime. They never adopted Passover as the moment of the new year. Neither ancient nor modern have celebrated that. So what does the new year here mark? I think it marks the new year of faith. I think Passover is a new year, a marking of new year in faith for the Israelites. Passover marks the beginning of this deepening faith for Israel. Remember how long they've been in captivity. Over 400 years they have struggled. For 400 years they have listened to the Egyptians tell them that they ought to be worshiping their gods. And no doubt there are Israelites who did that. Many who left Egypt with Moses worshipped other gods. This moment of Passover marks the new year for them of faith, of that deepening faith. It's a moment when Israel left the service of Pharaoh and entered into the service of Yahweh. And it's not just a defining moment spiritually, although it is that. It's also a defining moment for families. Like Thanksgiving and Christmas that we celebrate here in our own time, in our own country, Passover was a family event. But it wasn't just a family event of the nuclear family celebrating. This is like some of you do with Thanksgiving and Christmas. Every family member who's ever been a part of your family gets invited to one home. How many of you celebrate Thanksgiving and or Christmas that way? Anybody? Yeah? Maybe not this year, but in years past you have, right? That's Passover. Passover wasn't just for the mom, dad, and the children. Passover was for aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, of every extension of that. They would pack as many people into one home as they possibly could. So Passover isn't just for me as an individual to think back on and remember, oh God, I'm so thankful that you rescued me. No, Passover is a shared memory event. It has a collective power, not just for the individual, but for the whole community, the whole family, as they reflect on and remember and ask the question, who is this God that we worship, and what has he done for us? The way of observing the meal is also very important. You probably notice some of this that gets talked about here. The Israelites are to dress how? Ready to get on the move, right? Be fully dressed, even have your walking staff in hand, like you're ready to zoom out the door right now. They're supposed to eat bread made without yeast. In other words, more quickly. Yeast takes time to rise. The bread of Passover is meant to be made quickly, on the run, on the go, so that they can move very quickly. And they're to eat with an eye on that blood-covered doorway, ready to head out at a moment's notice. God is ready to act in a mighty way in their midst, and he tells them what's about to happen. It's a terrible scene and a reminder of what happens when God's power is rejected and made light of, like the Egyptians did. That God is ready to unleash this final plague upon them, the killing of the firstborn throughout Egypt. And of course, you've all read that it's a terrible scene is what it is. I mean, you think about families waking up in the middle of the night to blood-curdling sounds of screams from people losing their firstborn. And what serves as a sign of that to come, the blood on the door serves as that sign. But for whom is the sign really? Does God really not know which houses belong to Israelites and which belong to Egyptians? Is God really that inept that he's uncertain whether this home holds Israelites and this home holds Egyptians? Does God really need that sign to tell him who lives here and who doesn't? I don't think so. Clearly, God knows who's living where. In Exodus 12 and verse 13, we're actually given the answer. If you look back at verse 13 there, now the translation that I read from, the New Living Translation, doesn't have this really important word here from Hebrew translated. Verse 13, but the blood on your doorpost will serve as a sign, my translation here says. But in Hebrew, there's a word there, lachem, which means for you. The blood on the doorposts serves as a sign for you, meaning for you Israelites. By having to mark their doorways in this way, they become active participants in the event. Jim brought up a few moments ago with communion. Why something physical that we need to do? Because we become active participants when we take the body and blood of Jesus and put it into our mouths. We are participating in that event. There's that kinetic energy that we give to that matters. And the same thing here, that painting of the blood on the doorposts matters. It's a participation in the event that's coming. The blood symbolizes the seriousness of the situation and the lengths to which God is going to go to rescue his people. God doesn't need the blood. The people do. They need the reminder that God is of what God is going to do. It's their proclamation of who they are and whose they are. That's what the blood symbolizes. It's not a sign for God. It's a sign for the people. And this Passover celebration was to be a memory that defined the whole nation. And in some sense it did. Though the details are somewhat vague on how defining it really became in later years with them. We know that the writers of the Old Testament continued to write about it. They would bring up this moment over and over as you read through Deuteronomy. Over and over again, this is the defining moment for the nation of Israel. The God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. It was brought up often as the reason to continue to worship Yahweh instead of some other God. It was used against Moses by his own brother in Exodus 32, which we're going to look at next week, as why the people should worship the golden calf instead. What we don't know for sure about Passover is quite how often it was to be started, that it actually was celebrated. How often was it to be celebrated? Every year, right? They were supposed to commemorate this festival every year at the same time. We know that a couple of kings in particular celebrated Passover with the Israelites, and that it was a huge and monumental event. In 2 Kings chapter 23, verses 21 and 22, we read this: King Josiah then issued this order to all the people: "You must celebrate the Passover of the Lord your God as required in this book of the covenant." Now this is after they have renovated the temple and found the book of the covenant, and Josiah has already torn his clothing and cried out to God, "Oh God, how terrible that we should have forgotten about you in this way." And he comes upon this passage about Passover, and he realizes, we've not been celebrating Passover. And so what do? We read this: "There had not been a Passover celebration like that," meaning in the time of Josiah, "since the time when the judges ruled in Israel, nor throughout all the years of the kings of Israel and Judah." Now some of you might be thinking, okay, so what, they went like maybe 30 years without celebrating Passover? No. This is roughly 700 to 800 years that they have been failing as a people to celebrate Passover. Now perhaps there were families who still took up the celebration on their own. Maybe they had not forgotten. Maybe the memory of what God had done had not been lost on them as a family. Maybe they passed that down generation to generation, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. But at the level that God wanted them to celebrate as a whole people, as a nation, united in this one event, proclaiming the worship of God in this really powerful way, they failed. They failed. Our country is about 200 years old. So 4 times the length of how long our country itself has been around. That's how long they had failed to partake of Passover. Think they were missing something? Kind of seems like it. Today, in present time, Passover has taken a very prominent place in Jewish families. As Christians, we continue to celebrate Passover, as we've already talked about, in a different way, of course. It doesn't look the same. We don't have, well, I was about to say we don't have fancy plates, but we actually do. We do kind of pass around fancy plates, don't we? It's celebrated differently. Thankfully, without the bitter herbs and stuff, I could do without those. But the blood, the lamb, the reflection on God as Savior are no less prominent for us, certainly, than they ever were for the Israelites. In fact, we could probably argue that they're even more prominent in the way that we worship. Let's talk about the memory of Passover as we see in chapter 13. For all that the Israelites are instructed to do in chapter 13, the emphasis keeps coming back, actually, to what the Lord has done on behalf of his people. Just like we do, the Israelites are good at pointing to their own accomplishments. Look how great we are. Look at what we have done for ourselves. Here in Exodus 13, Moses reminds them over and over again, this is what God is doing for you. It would be easy for them to focus on their contributions instead of reflecting and remembering that all of this happened because of God. The memory of Passover is only preserved when we remember to tell the next generation. Did you pick up on that in chapter 13? Look at verse 8 again in chapter 13 if you have it. I'll read it here for you. On the seventh day, you must explain to your children, I am celebrating what the Lord did for me when I left Egypt. You must explain to your children. The purpose of Passover isn't just about remembering, although that's really good. It isn't just about looking back, although that is also really good. The purpose of Passover is also to look forward into the future, to see the next generations as the vessels carrying God's truth. That we invest in the children because they are the legacy of who we are. That's how the Israelites should have understood Passover. That's why the Israelites should have continued to celebrate Passover. And that's how we should understand the Passover meal that we celebrate each week. Again, unfortunately, we don't know how often the Israelites actually celebrated Passover as they should. But thinking about the communion that we share each week, that we just shared in, how do you think about it? If partaking in communion is just an exercise in thinking backward and remembering the sacrifice of Jesus, then it's not having its fullest effect on us. The purpose of sharing the meal together is also to look forward to the future. We eat to be filled up by the body and blood of Christ so that we can face the next week, the next month, the next year. Thinking only of the past traps us there. We have to explain to our children. We have to think forward, think about the future, and explain to our children why we share this meal every week and why it's so very important that we do. The remembering of Passover isn't just an event, it's a ritual of identity. In verse 9 in chapter 13, we see the connection made even to the human body. Like a mark branded on your hand or your forehead, so Passover marks a Jewish person. Like cattle receive a branding when they're out in the field, right? So they can be distinguished between who actually owns the cattle if they're sharing pasture with somebody else's cattle. Passover marks a Jewish people as belonging to Yahweh. Communion marks us similarly. We get marked in two ways, through baptism and through communion, I believe. It is identity forming each and every week. It is a confession through ritual that I still believe in God and I still belong to God. And that confession is that God's saving work, for the Jews, it was deliverance from Egypt. For us, it's deliverance from sin. It's a confession that God's saving work in doing that is important enough to remember, to reflect on, and then to share about that with the next generation. That's the good news of Exodus 12 and 13. That God has acted so powerfully in our lives that there is something worth celebrating. That's what we participated in just a few minutes ago. That we are changed so much by God's saving work, we need to share with the next generation how we are changed. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 26, every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, You are announcing the Lord's death until he comes again. Participating in Passover, our Passover, isn't just about looking back. It is about proclamation. It is about looking forward. It is about thinking about the future and how we are changed whenever we participate in that Passover. And it all connects back to Exodus 12 and 13. It all started in Exodus 12 and 13 when God decided to step into this moment and rescue his people. And of course, as we reflect on it, we think about how God did that even more powerfully by Jesus stepping into history as a person and changing history and saving us from sin. Powerful chapters in Exodus 12 and 13. A couple of things to take away from this that I want you to think about. The first is, what important moments do you think about to remember what God has done for you? Passover is one of them. Partaking in communion connects to that and reflects on that and helps us share that memory, right? Together we share that memory. What other important moments do you think about what God has done for you? What memories to you stand out that help teach you that and remind you of that? And the second thing I want you to think about is, how does God's saving work impact your life? Think about the Israelites. For 800 years, they were supposed to reflect on and remember what God had done for them. Maybe that memory kind of lived at the back of their minds, but it didn't take a prominent place. For 800 years, they forgot. For 800 years, they failed to participate in Passover. And then whenever they did celebrate, it was a huge, joyous celebration. I have a feeling from that moment on, a lot of them were impacted, very powerful. So how does reflecting on God's saving work in your life impact you, and change you, and make you different? And if it doesn't, then what does that say about you and how you think about God's saving work? All right, it's family time. It's time to come together, to share together if you have a need that you want to share with us. Whether that be a thanksgiving, a praise, something really positive, joyful going on in your life, share that with us. Whether it's a prayer request, something that's not going great in your life that you need to share with us, please do that. That's what we're here for, to support and pray for each other. So if you have any of those needs, come forward as we stand and sing.